other is the hidden power of Spark NC, and one I hope the state board can seriously considers looking further into. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Stabler.
Good morning. I'm Brittany Branch. I'm the Spark Lab leader in Mount Airy City Schools. And I think the best way for me to share with you what it's like to be a Spark Lab leader is just to tell you about my students. I think their stories underscore the transformative power of what this program has to offer and the model that it uses to encourage students to learn. Sean mentioned that their Spark Lab is housed in their alternative school. Ours is housed in our traditional high school. Our students are able to come to the Spark Lab anytime they want. It's open before school, after school, and throughout the day. But students are not scheduled into the Spark Lab, so they come by choice. Today I want to tell you about a student named Peyton, and I want to preface that with I could tell you about any of our students. Every single one of our students has a story to tell about how the program has impacted them just in the first half of this school year. See, many of the students who come to the Spark Lab in Mount Airy exist in the margins. They've never had a space in school where they felt like they belonged. They're not athletes, they're not in the band or in art. And now all of a sudden, we have created space for these students. So Peyton comes to the Spark Lab pretty regularly. At the start of the year, he came maybe once a week. And keep in mind, Peyton doesn't need the course credit. He's a junior, he's on track to graduate. This is something he just chose to do because he wanted to. If you ask Peyton what he loves, he'll tell you he loves video games. And I'm sure you all know a kid like that who loves video games. But if you ask him why, he'll tell you, because I'm good at it. And I don't know that he's ever felt that way about school before. He started coming to the Spark Lab and really digging into all the units that connected with gaming. Some of them very directly, game development and design, and some of them more indirectly, like cybersecurity and data analytics. Usually sat by himself at a computer and worked quietly, but made good progress. After a while, though, I started noticing him talking to other students, which wasn't very common for Peyton. And then he started working together with other students on units. And that's another cool thing about Spark, is we don't expect these students to do their work in isolation. We don't do our work in isolation. We have a collaborative model in our state alone in education. We work together on teams. So we do that in the Spark Lab as well. And if they want to work together on a product, they go for it. They even have the opportunity to video conference with students in other Spark districts. My students love to meet on our video conference with the kids in New Hanover County schools because they're into some of the same things as our kids. And it's fun to see them talk about what it's like to live in the mountains versus live in the beach. I think, though, that the turning point for Peyton had more to do with our partnerships with high-tech industry. We regularly have visitors who come to the Spark Lab, sometimes just to check it out and see what it's about, and sometimes to kind of get a tour. So we had a visitor one time who came, hung out for a short bit, asked some kids some questions, and I thought they were ready to leave, and instead they pulled up a chair and sat behind Peyton. And this person sat there for a solid 30 minutes. I'm sure they had more on their agenda that day, but instead they asked him what he was doing, and they asked him what he was working on. Well, Peyton was working on a unit about audio development. He was designing just a really short audio clip that went with some imagery, and this person worked in marketing and thought that was such a cool connection. Prior to this, I don't think Peyton had ever thought about audio design as having anything to do with marketing. He was just thinking about designing video games. But after that, it was like Peyton realized that not only there's a space where he belongs, but what he's doing is important. And there are people out there who value the work that he's doing, the products that he's creating, and he started coming to the Spark Lab every single day. He started asking questions, he started making suggestions. Now he's working with a team of other Spark students to develop a unit that'll be available this spring for students all across the state to participate in, completely designed by students with almost no help from the adults. So for me, that's the proof of concept. It's the students. It's the students who are creating these high quality products and feeling like their interests have value to the world. So with that, I'll turn it back to you guys for any questions for us.
Mr. Blackburn, I don't know if you want to chime in here, but we saw the spark in those students' eyes in the lab that we visited. They were engaged, they were anxious to talk to us about what they were doing. Anything you want to add before I open it up?
Well, it was absolutely amazing. And they interconnected with each other, and they also interconnected with us. They were trying to teach us as well. So you can see that what she just said is that these were kids that nobody pays much attention to. And so they work in their own space. And for them to get to share was really amazing. So I do have a comment though. So I'm looking at the map, and I would be remiss because I'm the Northwest and the West
In the east.
and the East. So, and we all know about the challenges in North Carolina for the East and West and economic development. So I would encourage us to see if we can look to the East and the West, because there's vast holes in employment places there. And this is something that people can do. And if you need help with infrastructure, that's where you should reach out to us. So.
Point. And I'll just tell you that currently we're working on our model to be able to say, what does it cost to actually have a lab? And so that we hope to have that for the short session, so that we can say we have 115 school districts that would all like to have a Spark Lab, and this is the way it would look. But we're also looking for private funding, and we're receiving some. We're also looking at larger grants to be able to fund some of these things, because we had a lot of interest in that. So I'll just say we're just in the early stages, and we thought it was really important to start smaller so that we could prove what we were doing as a scale up. But thank you, and yes, we recognize that we have large gaps.
All right, we're going very long here, so we're, okay, no, I just got a thumbs up. Superintendent Drew.
I'll keep it brief. So I visited a Spark Lab in Castle Haynes, which is on the way to Wilmington, and it was, I think any time that I go into a high school and see teenagers engaged is a thing of beauty. I have been visiting schools in some kind of official capacity in North Carolina since 2015, and it's the same old story. You go to an elementary school in a district, and there's all these incredible things going on, and the kids are engaged. And then you go to the middle school, and maybe there's a little bit of that happening, but they're a little less engaged. And then you get to a high school in the same district, and the kids are in rows, they're looking straight ahead. Some of them are paying attention, and some of them are not. Most of them are not engaged. And so what I saw at the Spark Lab in Castle Haynes, which was serving a couple of high schools, correct, Dr. Moody, was kids, some of them working alone, some of them working together, some of them were working across the state virtually with kids from other Spark Labs, and they were all able to articulate to me what they were doing and why, which is something I love to see.
Thank you all for coming and sharing this with us, and because it's such exciting work, and it is so future forward,
Yeah.
and we need to try and expand this across the state. So I hope we'll be hearing more.
I just want to say a brief thank you. I want to thank our business advisory. It's SAS and IBM and Cisco and Capital Collab, and I know I'm going to miss some. But all of our high-tech business partners have helped us develop these units and make sense of what we're doing. And it has been the state staff and Superintendent Truitt, thank you for your commitment for it, because every time we've called, someone has helped us think through the problem or think through the next step of how we could do that. So thank you both. Thank our businesses and our state staff. Appreciate it.
All right, quickly, a couple of actions on first read. The first one is SLA 1, which is both of these are rules updates, and they're approvals of a temporary rule. One is parental concern hearings, the other is three-year high school graduation. Mr. Collins is going to do both of these, so we'll just start with one and then move on to the next. All right.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz, and good morning, everyone. So what you have before you today is the proposed final temporary rule for adoption. This was first proposed back in November and went through notice and public comment. So the first of these rules is 16 NCAC 060.0701, which is parental concern hearings. This was put forth pursuant to General Statutes 115C-76.60, which required the State Board of Education to adopt rules for parental concern hearings related to matters arising under Chapter 115C, Article 7B, Part 4 of the General Statutes. As indicated previously, the State Board was directed to adopt an emergency rule by January 30th. That happened at the November meeting, and concurrent to that, you all approved the proposed text for the temporary rule that would eventually replace that. So following the statutorily required notice and comment period, we are presenting a revised version of the rule for temporary adoption. The changes in this rule have been made based on public comments received as well as input from colleagues in the field. Mr. Fafaria has the rule up on the screen, and I just want to highlight some of the changes that you will see indicated there in red from what was in the proposed text of the rule that was originally approved. First, the statute gives parents the rights to request a parental concern hearing regarding the, quote, procedure or practice, unquote, of a public school unit under 115C, Article 7B, Part 4. Given the vagueness of that provision, we have added definitions for practice and procedure. Procedure is defined as a regular method or process as established in the written policies of a PSU by which the PSU provides the notices or information to parents as required by GS 115C-76.45 or age-appropriate instruction on certain topics as described in GS 115C-76.55. Practice means a regular method, process, or course of conduct, whether or not established by the written policies of the PSU, by which the PSU provides those notices and information. Both definitions are based on common definitions of these terms and make clear that isolated incidents or isolated conduct by PSU personnel do not qualify for a parental concern hearing. Second, the revised rule clarifies the scope of procedures or practices of a PSU that are eligible for appeal consistent with the statutory language. Third, the revised rule clarifies the type of documentation that a parent must submit when they request a hearing. Finally, the revised rule adds a jurisdictional review step prior to the appointment of a hearing officer. The purpose of this jurisdictional review is to ensure that the request for a hearing meets the requirements of the statute and the rule prior to the appointment of a hearing officer, and thus prior to any cost incurred to the PSU. Under this step, the SBE or its authorized designee within the agency may dismiss the request if the parent has failed to provide any of the information required by the rule, if the parent's concern does not address the procedures or practices of a PSU under Chapter 115C, Article 7B, Part 4, the parent has failed to provide the PSU with 30 days to resolve the concern, or the parent's proposed resolution is not within the legal authority of the PSU or the State Board to grant. We anticipate returning to the State Board with a proposed permanent rule later this year, but this time I'd be happy to take any questions on the revised rule and the changes that are before you.
Any questions on this one? Hearing none, thank you, Mr. Gall, and you can go on to SLA 2.
So the second one of these would be a fair bit shorter. This is 16 NCAC 06D.0510. This has to do with 3-year graduation requirements that the State Board was required to adopt as part of Session Law 2023-134, which was the appropriations bill. The emergency rule was previously adopted back in November and concurrently proposed the text of the temporary rule. Following the notice and comment period, we're presenting a slightly revised version of the rule for temporary adoption. Other than a few small technical changes, the only addition to the rule is paragraph G, which requires the PSU to provide information on 3-year graduation option when the students are registering for their 9th grade classes. This change is intended to reflect language in the proposed amendments to State Board Policy Grad 006 that Ms. Shaw Coltrane will be presenting momentarily. As with the previous rule, we anticipate bringing the permanent rule later this year. Happy to take any questions on this rule.
Questions on this one? Hearing none, thank you, Mr. Collins.
Thank you.
We have one discussion item. SLA 3 is a State Board Policy Amendment, 9th grade students accelerated preparation for college entry, which, as Mr. Collins just said, relates to the temporary rule that he just, Ms. Shaw.
Thank you, Ms. Camus. Happy New Year, everybody. New year ahead. What we have here is an update, actually, based on House Bill 259. You all actually already had a policy related to graduating early, but we did update it a little bit, added some stuff to make sure this was available not just for those entering college, but also enlisting and employment, et cetera. And then based on the law, there's a whole section about course sequencing. The law does ask us to provide a course sequence. However, we have made it a recommended sequence because school districts really need that flexibility based on their teachers and master schedules and classroom and student needs, right? And so we did provide a recommended course sequence, but also in the policy made it very clear that districts can adapt as needed. It really follows the law. We do add in that a student can change their mind from this commitment, and that it does need to be a joint decision by the parent and the child. The other piece we did include were that cooperative innovative high schools. We've had a lot of principals contact us. We just wanted to make sure that students who apply for this, who decide to go on this pathway, would not be applying to a cooperative innovative high school program, because that's not the intent. And so we don't want those principals to feel like they need to offer this as well.
Any questions about this policy amendment? Ms. Moore?
Thank you for this. I just had one comment in conversation that I've had with
Yeah.
some folks about this change in this legislation. I think it's important to note that while it's an accelerated pathway for a 3-year graduation, it is not meant for students who are necessarily deemed accelerated students.
Agreed.
I think there are many students who, for many reasons, could benefit from graduating from high school in 3 years and moving on to, as the language states, it could be secondary institution of learning or higher institution of learning, or it could be the workforce, or it could be the military if they're 18, I guess. But I think to expand our vision of the students who might be able to
Sure.
benefit from being able to graduate in 3 years and move on should be a component that we're taking a look at, and is messaged as a part of the implementation of this to all of our PSUs.
I mean, I'm happy to add something about that as well, because we don't want that to limit children, that they do not have to be identified in any way. They will need to be accelerated at some point when it comes to course acceleration, but of course, we do that now with all students and do not limit that access if there is a child of interest and the school and the family feel like that's the best option for them.
Thank you, Ms. Koshako. And I know this has been a lot of work in a very short period of time to get this ready.
Thank you.
So thank you for that.
Thank you.
2 consent items today. The first is SLA 4, membership to the American Rescue Plan Committee of Practitioners. We have had a couple of action items the last couple of months on this, but this is the addition of one more member, Ms. Jeanette McEachern, a principal in Cumberland County Schools. SLA 5 is a report to the North Carolina General Assembly on the 22-23 Read to Achieve approval and denial of literacy intervention plans. As you recall, each district has to have a literacy intervention plan. This report is due in February of each year. 100% of our LEAs submitted the reports on time. 15 were approved as is. 100 were approved with recommendations. Feedback was given if any specific resources or materials were not aligned with the science of reading. In 24-25, plans in districts using such materials will not be approved, rather than being approved with recommendations. The LEA will be required to update the literacy improvement plan and resubmit with aligned materials. The Office of Early Learning will continue to work with LEAs to be proactive and try to avoid those types of non-approvals in the next school year. So that concludes the work of the Student Learning and Achievement Committee.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. We'll now move to Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee, led by Mr. John Blackburn. Mr. Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm joined in this work by my colleague, Ms. Jill Kamnitz. I'd like to express my appreciation to her and to all the folks at DPI to help us do our work. The first order of business is we're going to call on Mr. Bruce Friend, the Chair of the Charter School Review Board, and John Eldridge to bring us an update on what's been going on at Charter School Review.
Good morning. Happy New Year to everybody. Glad to be here, and thank you for all the work you're doing to support education in our state. And John and I are pleased to provide this quick update on the work of this Charter School Review Board since we last were together in December. Thought I'd give you two updates on work that we've been doing as far as sort of this cycle of charter school new applications and renewals. The first is why don't we start with new applications. As a reminder, we've had 15 applicants who wanted to open charter schools in 2025. Of those 15, we've completed interviews, reviews of 10 of those 15 applicants. 6 of those applicants have been approved by the Charter School Review Board to move into the ready to open process. That's not a guarantee that they're going to open. It means they have between now and 2025 to do all the due diligence to get them to the point where then they would come back before us for final approval to open in 2025. 4 of those 10 applicants that we interviewed were declined upon their initial interview before us. 2 of the applicants, we meet next week. 2 of the applicants will be back in front of us next Monday for their second interview, and we'll render a decision then as to whether or not we're going to move them into ready to open or decline their application as well. Should go back to those 4 that we've declined already, just as a reminder of process. They would technically have the right to appeal our decision to you. There's one of those 4 who's still within that 30-day appeal timeline that technically could send the Office of Charter Schools a letter to say we're going to appeal the CSRB's decision. We don't anticipate that happening, but anything can happen between now and next week, I suppose. So, we don't anticipate any of those 4 appealing. And also 3 of the initial 15 withdrew their application before they ever came before the Charter School Review Board. So again, we'll finish up the new application cycle next Monday when we meet. Have the final list of those that were approved to go into the ready to open process. Second summary is just on renewals as well. As you remember, each year we have a different crop of schools that are up for their renewal. We had 17 charter schools in the current cohort, we call them, of renewal schools. As a reminder, we have a decision to make of what the length of their renewal will be, or if they're renewed at all. Like that's obviously an option as well. The criteria or the buckets they could fall into for renewal would be either 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, or 10 years. You see on my slide, 10 years has the asterisk next to it because there's actually criteria that's legislatively mandated for 10-year renewal if they meet those. We have interviewed, there were 17 schools in the renewal cycle this year. We've interviewed 14 of the 17 thus far. There are 3 schools that will be, whose information will be provided to us next Monday. I will share those 3 schools all meet the statutory language for a 10-year renewal. So we still like to hear from them or hear the information provided to us about their successes since their last renewal. But those all 3 that we'll hear from on Monday fall into that 10-year bucket. We will make a decision on the other 14 at our February meeting. We've interviewed the schools, we've reviewed the data that provided to us from the Office of Charter Schools. We will also hear from DPI staff around any compliance, non-compliance, or any financial issues. If there's any additional information we need to have on any of those schools, we'll receive that next Monday as well. And then again, the schedule right now is to make a decision on those schools in February. That's really it we've been busy since we last met, and certainly want to thank Ashley Vaccaro and her team at the Office of Charter Schools. They do a yeoman's job in terms of processing all these applications and all the renewals that we go through. And 17 actually may seem like a lot right now, but next year I think the number is over 40 that are up for renewal. So we've got a busy year ahead for renewals next year.
Just a quick question out of curiosity, of the new applications, are any of them accelerated openings?
There was, of those 15 that submitted an application. There was one that requested accelerated. We did not, that was one of the 4 we did not approve. So of the 6 thus far that we've approved, and there's possibly 2 more starting next Monday, none of them are accelerated. These would all be schools that if they exit RTO successfully, they would open in 2025.
I was just curious, because we've been hearing so much about the difficulties of, particularly with the building, locating,
Yes,
make
that,
acceleration even harder, so I was just curious whether anyone had pulled that off.
correct. And there's no guarantee that these 6, could be 7, could be 8, right, that will open in 2025 too. They may find out through the RTO process that either they're not quite ready, or we are finding more and more of the last couple of years access to property facilities. It's not uncommon that schools that were approved to open will come back to us and ask for a delay. I actually think we have maybe one of those on our agenda Monday to review, that wants to come back for a delay. So,
Thank you. We appreciate both of you coming today.
okay,
And if anybody wants to watch the proceedings, they are posted on our e-boards, so you can do that. I've done that, Jill's done that. It's a fascinating process, and we thank you for your hard work.
all right, thank you all,
Thank you all.
appreciate it. Yep.
Just one quick comment or question. Is there a place on the website, for anybody listening as well as myself,
Mhm.
where all of the list of the 16 is available? Because the links that I'm going to are dead links. So all of the schools and their status and their applications.
Yeah,
I
the
may
answer to
not
that
be
is,
looking in the
the
right
answer to
place.
that is yes. I don't know where it's at. I know how to find it.
I think that would be helpful
maybe-
for all of us to have,
Yeah.
so that we've got the most updated list and where all the schools are, what their status is. sort
And
of a
even their
spreadsheet.
applications are
Right, all
available,
of it.
yeah.
Yeah, that should be on the website. I'll check and make sure that the links are working, but the submitted apps section should have the
Yeah.
applications.
Right, I'm just, the press release that was issued in May, that
Right.
has the 16, has 2 links in it that are dead.
Okay,
So,
I'll check
there
it.
may be other places. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
That's it.
gentlemen.
All right,
We
thank you all.
appreciate your coming. So EICS 1, Policy Amendment Charter School Renewal Process. Colleagues, you received this week a document with contemplated revisions to the Charter Schools Reviewed Policy, CHTR 007. The policy currently in place is dated, and it isn't reflective of recent changes in charter school law. I'll now invite our legal counsel, Ms. Allison Schaefer, to walk us through these red lines. Good morning, Allison.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to see all of you. So this is a draft policy that's just up for presentation and comment based on, and its provisions that everyone agrees this policy needs to be updated as it currently exists. And so what you have before you is a redlined version of the policy that's currently in place, I think, and it just does some things. So this is based on feedback from the Office of Charter Schools folks, from the Charter Review Board and the State Board of Education. And again, this is an open month for people to be able to comment. And if they have any comments, they can submit them, I think, to Mr. Faria, and he will collect them for the board and the review board. The first page just talks about the general philosophy of needing a policy for, or having a policy for renewals to guide the work of the different groups that are working on the renewal process. And on the second page is on section 1. It just talks about what the charter school's role is. This doesn't change what the charter school office has been doing. It just sort of sets out there what their responsibilities are. Section number 2 talks about a portfolio being submitted. The prior version required a report, and according to Ms. Beccaro, that's not necessary to have a report. All that information is collected and it will be put in one website, so that's just to express that. The chart you see there about the sources of material for possible consideration by the Charter Review Board and the State Board, whoever's the chartering entity, because there's an appeal from the Charter Review Board, it would go to the State Board. Just some areas that are listed there, added a few offices to talk about the different areas that might, different parts of DPI that might have information that is relevant to the charter school information. School site visits are not just done by the charter school, for example, on the second page of that chart, but there are other groups that, like Exceptional Children's or School Business, that go out, federal programs that go out and gather information about the functioning of the schools, and that's just part of their job. There, next, under the guidelines for decision, there's some definitions that are added that were, just to clarify what is things like a financially sound audit, what compliance issues are, since it's discussed in here, what compliance issues are. And then the comparable scores of the charter school to the regular school district is currently at 5. There's been a suggestion that go to 2. Obviously, that will be something that's up for discussion, and I know there's ongoing discussions with the State Board and the Charter Review Board and others. So that is a material change or proposal. Then there's this issue that has come up in new legislation looking at comparing subgroups. If the charter school serves certain subgroups, compare them to similar subgroups in the local school district when considering whether their results are comparable to the local school district. Again, that's added by statute. The charter school renewal guidelines, as was mentioned by Mr. Friend, the 10 years is basically statutory, and so that's, if they meet certain criteria, they get those, they meet those years. There's not a lot of change in the 7 and 5 years in terms of what it has been in the past, but again, just updating it. Some of that is recommended by the Office of Charter Schools. The 3-year version, there was a version that talked about what you have to do to get a 3-year. I think the main factor that's added here is the requirement that if school districts are not, or schools are not achieving a, or have compliance issues that are unresolved, that there is at least a plan in place, a strategic improvement plan in place, that they're showing some progress and making a difference in those areas. So the plan idea as part of the guidelines is a relatively new, is a new addition. So basically showing that there is some progress even if they're not able to show compliance in a lot of areas. And then the non-renewal, the current proposed version was just reciting the statute, and so this is an attempt to put some clarity on what, for the charter schools and for the Charter Review Board and the Office of Charter Schools, on what can result in a non-renewal. So again, these are all, basically failure to meet the minimum requirements without showing progress under a plan, that kind of thing. So I'm not going to go in every detail. People can read it for themselves, but that basically is the version that is on the table for discussion. The other thing that is at the very last is the additional factors that may be considered. Those come from the Charter School Office, and it would include feedbacks from site visits, declining or increasing ADM, and a pattern of high or low student and or staff attrition. So again, those are the things that are on the table, and there's a month to discuss it. The Charter Review Board is meeting next week. If you have any comments for them, I'm sure they would be welcome to receive that, and I guess that would go to Ms. Becerra if she's collecting those comments, but that's, any questions about that?
Thank you, Ms. Schaefer. The chair has been very kind to allow us to talk about this if we want to today and tomorrow, since you just got this information recently. So I'll pause now in case you have any comments. And then once again, you can make comments today and also tomorrow. So, Vice Chair Buckley.
Giving this some thought, having looked at it, and one of the things that occurs is this policy is built to go forward into the future. It's taking into account some changes that have taken place from the past as well as statutory changes. And that is well and good. We just heard a couple minutes ago from the Charter School Review Board representatives that the renewal process is down the road. In fact, interviews have already occurred. A set of criteria, as I understand it, was provided for those schools that were up for renewal. That set of criteria would have been based on former criteria that had been used that may be differentiated, at least in small part, by this proposed future policy. And I'll lift up as an example of that, if comparability were to change from 5 to 2, that would, within 5% to 2%, that could affect some of these renewal applications. And I believe I saw some information that would suggest that it would potentially affect on that one factor. So I think it's important that we have these future clarifications, and I appreciate the work that the review board has done, the council's office has done, the Office of Charter Schools has done, and the input from various sources. And I think we will be better for having, worked through a process. I think whatever ultimate policy we come up with to vote on after receiving comments over the next month, I think we should have some form of an addendum on the motion that is the policy, that is the long-term policy, but it is not the criteria that will apply to this year's renewals. That is, we're not going to change the game in the middle of the process for the renewals. I think that would make the Charter School Review Board's work much easier to work from, and I think it would be, frankly, the only fair thing to do under the circumstances of making an appropriate and needed change, the timing not being what any of us would prefer. But I think we should have an amendment in place that would exempt this year's considerations of the renewals as we move forward with the policy. So I just throw that out for the board's thoughts.
Vice Chair Duncan, thank you for those encouraging comments. Well thought out and very much appreciated by Ms. Kamnitz and I, and also some other folks. So, thank you.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions? Ms. Kamnitz? Okay.
Well, I would just say, I mean, we have been talking about renewal the last several months, and I am appreciative of the folks that have worked on this version, because I think that it addresses a lot of the concerns that would have been expressed, but also I would say that we've experienced over the last few years, every time renewals come up. We were not finding the clarity and consistency that was needed in the existing renewal guidelines, I don't think. And I think this will make, particularly with the number of renewals that we know are coming next year, that the Charter School Review Board is going to have to deal with, I think that this clarity will help them tremendously in dealing with those numbers. And some of the things that we know from some of our experiences over the last few years with some of the couple of schools that we've had to close, this now includes some very badly needed items. Particularly, I'm thinking about the conflict of interest, as that's been a problem and that we've had to deal with in several of the closures that so I'm glad to see that clarified. And I totally agree with Vice Chair Duncan that at this point we need to be clear that this is for next year.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? We'll ask you, because we want you to study this tonight, so we don't need a great long discussion tomorrow because I don't want to get in trouble with the chair. However, we will open it up for discussion again tomorrow, if that's okay. All right.
Thank you. If I could add, first I want to thank Mr. Blackburn and Ms. Kamnitz for your work on this policy, as well as the Office of Charter Schools and the Review Board leadership that participated and provided input to this draft policy. I think I agree with the Vice Chair. We need to give consideration to the schools that are already in the pipeline that started the process under criteria different than this draft, but yet we need some long-term policy improvements. This draft policy is superior to the existing draft policy in a number of ways, or the existing policy that stands. And that is, first, it clarifies the expectations we have of the department in fulfilling our management, oversight, and compliance responsibilities that the State Board has from the Constitution. Second, it also clarifies the parameters in which the Review Board can conduct their work. And there's particular benefit to the Review Board of operating within those parameters in that it provides greater protection from potential litigation to operate within the policy parameters of the State Board of Education. But the third reason why this is particularly a better policy than what we currently have is that this draft emphasizes quality. It recognizes those schools that are achieving the quality standard in academics, financial management, conflict of interest, and rewards them with a longer term. And that's appropriate, because we need that stability. But it also recognizes that for schools who cannot meet that standard of academic performance, financial management, or conflict of interest, that they don't continue. And so for those reasons, I think it's important for us to get this policy in final form and move forward. I'll admit that it's a policy that's a work in progress. And what we commit to is in the days ahead to continuing to have discussions with the Charter Review Board leadership to gain their additional perspective from them and to find the appropriate position from which the State Board can have a policy that contributes to their work in the support of our students who attend charter schools. Thank you.
I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Ms. Schaefer and Mr. Fafario for helping us to do this red line over the holiday. So I'm very appreciative of your all's hard work for that, so thank you. All right, so EICS 2 is report to the North Carolina General Assembly regarding Rowan Salisbury Renewal School System. Last month, Dr. Kelly Withers appeared before the board to provide an update on how Rowan Salisbury Schools is doing under its renewal designation, which gives the entire district charter-like flexibility. Under statute, since 3 years has passed since the renewal designation took effect, this is the first opportunity for the State Board to consider how things are going and determine whether to terminate the renewal designation or in the alternative to take no action and consider how things are going after 3 years. It is effectively, in charter parlance, a 3-year renewal. Board members had specific questions about how Rowan Salisbury is measuring its success and what its expectations are relative to these measures 3 years from now. Dr. Withers is back with us today to present additional information. I see Dr. Withers, you brought some folks with you, and so before you begin, I'd like for you to recognize the folks you brought with you.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for my opportunity to return to further share information about our renewal journey. I brought with me today our Chief Resources Officer, Carol Herndon, and our Chief Operations Officer, Jamie Durant. Both of these team members have extensive experience within the renewal district and would share with you today that renewal is not what we do, it's who we are. And so the remainder of Cabinet would have loved to have been here as well, but it's the day before school starts, and we are hosting an event back in our district to get prepared for tomorrow's kickoff of our second semester. So today we will revisit our directional system and remind the board of the timeline of renewal, who we are, and end with the answers to the question of how we are measuring our short-term success over the next 3 years. So as I've previously shared, the Rowan Salisbury School work is rooted in this renewal directional system that's comprised of 3 equal parts: academic skills, unique life goals, and interpersonal skills, each with an equal emphasis to build the healthy and engaged learner. And perhaps a key piece of our directional system is found in the outer circle, and that is in the fact that our design process is teacher-led on what we call teacher-led design teams as they work to redesign this process. The next part is the timeline of renewal, and I know many of you know this, but I can't help but emphasize this, that our work that we are engaging in is pivotal, and we've learned a lot of lessons. One of the strongest lessons that we've learned is that sustainability in employees and leadership is key, especially early in transformational work. As you know, House Bill 986 was passed in June of 2018, and it granted our district flexibilities as the only state's renewal district. This designation was approved by our board and subsequently by the state board, and it was framed as a transformational journey to redesign the student experience and to redesign and define accountability metrics that demonstrate student success. In 2018-19, our teacher-led design teams, our leaders, our staff as a whole spent an extensive amount of time brainstorming, researching, designing, and coming up with models that they wanted to pilot in our schools that would impact that student experience and ultimately accountability metrics. In 2019-20, we entered the year with a lot of excitement as we started to implement the designs that they had spent a year working on. I don't think I have to speak again about March of 2020. You can see the little friendly graphic there of what happened. And this work paused as we all shifted to survival, not thriving in our classrooms and our design. In addition to the impact of the pandemic, I don't think we can emphasize enough, perhaps the most defining moments of our renewal journey occurred in the fall of 2020 with the announcement of the retirement of Dr. Lynn Moody, the current superintendent. And over the next 21 months, our district had 5 superintendent transitions in that time period. This period of uncertainty, definitely attributed to leadership transitions and the evolving pandemic over those months, essentially caused the transformative work to pause until the fall of 2022. As we regained our footing and began to move forward, we started that design process again, essentially. We reset mindsets, and we designed our Renewal and Action Strategic Plan, which I presented to you in December. This work was connected to our directional system. It occurred over a 7-month period. It was approved by our local board in April of 2023, and then shared across our district through what we called strategic plan roadshows in May of 2023. And essentially, the execution of this plan launched just 5 months ago in August of 2023. I also think it's important to revisit who we are. We are not a charter school. We are not a charter district. We do not utilize a specific system to select our students or to allow students entry into our district. We proudly serve the students that live within the geographic boundaries of Rowan County. We currently have 18,195 students in our district, 0.2% American Indian Alaskan Natives, 0.8% Asian, 19.8% Black, 23.6% Hispanic, 7.5% multiracial, and 48.1% white. As of June of 2023, 72.3% of our students were designated as socioeconomically disadvantaged, and currently all schools in our district operate under CEP, which means every student in our district receives free breakfast, free lunch, and our high school students receive an after-school meal if they stay for athletics, arts, enrichment, remediation, or our night school programs. We have 10,286 of our students, roughly 56.5%, are assigned to bus transportation. And our buses travel over 11,874 miles each day, taking students to and from schools. So I hope this illustrates that we are a proud public school district. We just happen to have charter-like flexibilities. We serve the students within our geographic boundaries, and our flexibilities were granted to us to rethink the public educational experience and to rethink accountability metrics that measure the whole student outcome. These flexibilities are, in our opinion, future considerations for schools across our state and our nation. We believe we have what many districts deserve. Renewal defined. I'm not going to spend a tremendous amount of time on this slide as it was part of the December presentation, but we do have flexibilities in 4 areas: calendar, curriculum, personnel, and finance. And we explained some of that in December for you. We've just restarted that work and hope to continue to push those boundaries. I did not share this sentiment with you the last 2 times I've visited. These 2 statements passionately describe the vision for our work and were used to frame the development of our Renewal in Action strategic plan. The fervent belief in these 2 sentences is the reason that last time when I visited you, I didn't start with the demographics. We have in the past spent an incredible amount of time talking about who we were, in effect saying that that is why we were achieving where we were. But in fact, we are committed to changing that narrative. We serve all the children of Rowan County, and as an organization, we believe adamantly these 2 sentences. We do not accept that the economic status of our community will dictate the outcomes of our system, but instead we are committed and determined to be a system whose student outcomes dictate the economic status of our community. This statement is extremely important to us. It was shared as we started the strategic plan development process, and it was shared in May with every employee of our staff, on our staff, all our entire team, unapologetically, as the why of our work. So this was the plan, the cover of the plan, our Renewal in Action, again, that we launched just 5 months ago. And our goal within this plan is, again, renewal is who we are. We were given the opportunity to transform Rowan-Salisbury schools, not simply turn it around. Turn it around to us signifies a need to turn back to the ways of old, back to the ways of tradition, back to traditional metrics. We approach this work as a way to completely redesign it, turn it upside down, if you will, and for the purpose of restoring the passion of our students, our staff, our community, our families, of reimagining policy and practice to personalize the experiences, not standardize it, and to ultimately renew excellence in education for the whole child. This work is meant to be measured by long-term metrics of our students' journeys, and I shared these last time as well. We measure this long-term work in multiple ways: enrolled, enlisted, and employed, educational attainment within our community, the retention of quality staff, and climate. And for the purpose of this discussion today, I was asked to define my vision of successful outcomes in the short term over the next few years as we embark on this transformational road. So I'll start with graduation rate. RSS definitely believes that the graduation rate is an important metric of our success for our students and our community, specifically as we work to improve the economic status of our community. In 2022-2023, we were above state average with a graduation rate of 88.4. It's important to note that the Rowan-Salisbury Schools class of 2023 graduated with an average of 29.69 credits earned in 4 years, despite the fact that our district only requires 22 credits for graduation. We are not simply pushing our students through the system, but instead we're counseling them to take full advantage of all of the offerings we have to enable them to be successful. My expectation is that in 3 years, the RSS 4-year graduation rate will consistently exceed 90% as a district. Our student attendance percentage has historically hovered around 90%. We believe that our approach to design an educational experience tied to our directional system will improve student engagement and therefore attendance. My expectation is that through these efforts, in 3 years, the Rowan-Salisbury School District attendance percentage will exceed 92% annually. Work-based learning is a key component of our directional system, aligned with unique life goals. We want to ensure that students have time, have resources, and are well equipped to explore career options and understand the necessary steps to pursue their chosen career path after graduation. Currently, 66.7% of our students report at least one work-based learning opportunity during high school. We are proud of that number, but however, the expectation is in 3 years, 85% of our RSS graduates will report at least one work-based learning experience during high school. Another metric is our enrolled, enlisted, or employed data. We believe that reaching the graduation stage is not enough to ensure that our graduates can thrive and change the economic status of their families and our community. We believe that our graduates must be enrolled, enlisted, or employed in a position linked to their post-secondary career goal in order to productively move forward in their lives. This graph shows you that last year's class, 11.1% were undecided of their next step upon graduation. The next graph shows you that of our employed students, 32.5% of them were not employed within a field linked to their post-secondary career goal. This would mean that they would not meet our metric of successful employment as an enrolled, enlisted, employed student. So my expectation in this space is twofold. The first one is that within 3 years, each RSS student, K-12, will have a career development plan that documents their passions and interests and is being used to help design their educational journey in order to create a pathway towards enrollment, enlistment, or employment. The second part of my expectation is that within these 3 years, 80% of our graduates will report successful enrollment, enlistment, or employment in a position linked to their post-secondary career goal. Our final metric that I'm showing you today, I think before I start that one, it is worth noting that we are charged with designing an alternate accountability model for our local metrics that would measure student success. That work was at the core of where we started this design process, was other alternative metrics to measure student success. Of the first 4 metrics that I just mentioned, only one of them is currently a part of the state accountability system, while the other 3 are included in some fashion in the revised model that the state is working to design. And I do want to share that we believe the inclusion of these ideas is a metric of our success as we've influenced conversations with the experiences that we've had. The last metric here shown is our growth status. Last year, only 12% of our schools exceeded growth, up from 3% in the previous 2 years, while only 30% met growth and 61% did not meet growth. The current accountability model labels 24 of our schools as low performing. I did also want to mention that there's an additional graph here pulled from a slide that the North Carolina Principals and Assistant Principals Association put together that shows that the growth status of schools, as well as proficiency metrics, however that's not shown here, are often indicative of the socioeconomic status of a district. However, as I shared, we are committed to not dwelling in these patterns. So as we look at our goal for student achievement, specifically as it surrounds growth status, renewal was meant as a disruptive, transformational effort to completely rethink the public education system, to personalize education for every student, to meet them where they are and design a journey that provides them with basic skills and then challenges them to think critically, explore intentionally, and create purposefully so that they are enrolled, enlisted, or employed upon graduation. This work was never meant to simply improve standardized test scores. It was meant to provide alternative methods to assess school quality and student achievement. It is a challenge that we gladly accepted because we see it as legacy work, but it is a journey of dual tracks. We have relaunched our design processes, and while we're still riding on the track of current accountability expectations and attempting to defy the trends that define academic achievement across public schools. With all of this context, it is my expectation that in 3 years, 72% of our schools will meet or exceed growth, with a target of 31% exceeding growth on standardized metrics. We do not believe that this by itself will define us as a success, but it is one measure among many that creates the picture of a whole child. And I'll end with this. I'm going to use Catherine Truitt's words that she said at the beginning, or a little while ago when we first entered the room. As the Renewal School District, we're not trying to be the same story. We want people to visit our district and see different, and see students engaged that can explain why they're learning what they're learning and how it connects to their future.
Thank you, Dr. Withers.
Yes, sir.
You had your 1-year anniversary. So
I did.
You're, what are you, 16 months in?
Yes.
now? Congratulations.
Yes,
So
thank you.
I'll pause for a moment to ask if any questions, Dr. Withers.
I do have
Dr.
a quick
Oxenden.
question. Thank you for returning again.
Sure.
I want to be sure that I heard you correctly. With regard, I'm looking at the item in our materials packet, and you did address the student attendance, which is number 3. So I'm not sure what the state average. I think that your goal is to be at 92% attendance rate. I'm not sure what it is for the state. Let's assume that the state is higher. Would that be too ambitious for you
To go to the state
be at
average?
least comparable with the state? And I don't know what that is. Maybe under 92%.
So that data was not easily accessible for us to see what the state average is. Someone else in this room may know. But what I would say is we base the goals that we set, the metrics that we set, based on where we have historically been. As far back as 2018-19, we were at 90.1. There's a spike in 1920. but you might realize that everyone from March to May was counted present if they were engaged in online learning or some sense. So that spike, I believe, is false. I do not believe we achieved a 97.5% attendance rate, although that would be great. So if we were basing it on that metric, and then if you look at 2020, 2021 coming off of the pandemic, we were on the B plan the whole year, where students only came 2 days a week. They were in a wellness day and then 2 days at home. So even that is somewhat elevated based upon the participation there. So without knowing what the target is, I couldn't really answer that, but I would say we were as aggressive as trying to restore what, before we even were renewal, where we were with our attendance. Yeah, thank you.
Matter of procedure, this item is for us today is discussion. We are not scheduled to take any action. If board members feel that termination or renewal designation is warranted, then a board member would need to make a motion to have that vote taken tomorrow. However, it is this committee's very strong recommendation that we not take any action against Rowan Salisbury Schools' renewal designation at this time. Jill Camness, the vice chair of this committee, and myself personally visited Rowan Salisbury in November, which you heard about, and I feel heartened by the things we saw with respect to the data and school letter grades. I would also offer these 3 points. Much of the data we see is impacted by COVID-19 interruptions. You will see district trends map state trends. The intent of the law was to provide RSS with charter-like flexibilities to explore innovative ways to turn around a chronically underperforming district. RSS specific and primary intent was not to use this to improve performance on standardized testing, but was to improve student preparation for post-secondary life. Dr. Withers has given us specific ways that the district is measuring that, and she also provided to us district expectations for 3 years from now. The committee recommends that Rowan Salisbury be allowed to continue to operate with the flexibility funding for another 3 years. If any of my fellow board members have any other thoughts or recommendations, we're happy to discuss those.
So I have a question for,
Superintendent.
thank you, I have a question for Dr. Withers. So I appreciate your comments about the purpose of this was not to just look at standardized test scores. And if there's one thing everyone in this room agrees on, is that the current school performance grading system of A through F is seriously flawed. So I think you wouldn't get any argument from anybody in here that there's more than one way to skin a cat. In other words, there's more than one way to show what a high quality school looks like. But you're not saying that it's not important, right? That's my question for you. You're saying we didn't set out to do this, but you're also not turning away from academic accountability. Is that right?
Correct. Well, I think, number one, there's multiple ways to measure academic accountability, but even the current metric, as I said at the end, it is a metric. It is an important metric, but it is not the only metric. And we do not believe that if we solely become successful in that metric, that is the mark of a successful school district either. Because, again, there are many districts that you've probably visited that are strong in that area, but the instruction you see is the same story.
Correct.
It depends on a lot of different factors, but no, we are not saying that we are ignoring that metric is there or that we are not working to prepare students in the skills that are necessary to be successful. But we are looking at it as a whole child experience and how do we prepare them for post-secondary. Does that answer your question?
It does. I would summarize that by saying that content and academic proficiency is essential, but not enough. And you're doing the other pieces. And so if you can manage to do both really well, you'll be the best district in the state.
That's our goal.
Thank you, Superintendent. Vice Chair Duncan.
Dr. Withers, thank you for your impactful and very passionate presentation.
Yes, sir.
It was much appreciated. And I agree with the superintendent that one thing everybody in this room agrees on is the accountability system as it sits now could use some additional improvements, which we're thankful are being worked on and you sound to be well aware of. They are the ones we have for the moment, and so we have to ask any district and any schools that come before us about that on occasion, and this is one of those cases. I really have two questions that relate to this. It'd be just helpful for us, I think, to have a good understanding. The first one is, with respect to the academic performance, are there any instructional or curriculum changes that you're evaluating as you go forward with the next 3 years? And the second one would be, just so you have both of them at one time, the second would be from a fiscal flexibility standpoint, is there anything that you're contemplating in terms of spending money in a different way in order to further the goals of the district as you have outlined them?
Thank you. So to the first question, I think we are constantly and consistently evaluating our instructional program. The first piece was just resetting, and if you ask any staff member, I could have brought anyone and they can speak to this in their visit, was resetting that our instruction has to be standard aligned. That doesn't mean standardized. It means standard aligned to what the curriculum says, and that's a distinct difference for us. But it's standard aligned, engaging, and we're working with currently the Schlettke Institute on defining engagement. And what does that mean? It's not just making sure students have fun, but it's making sure that they're engaged in the work and productive struggle, that they're invested, which is why the unique life goals are so important, so that we know what would make a student engaged. And then authentic feedback is the third prong of the work that we are working on, both from leadership to teachers, from teachers to students, so that a student knows where they are, why they are where they are, and how they get better. That's not a program, and again, we aren't really interested specifically in just programmatic changes. We are in the third cohort of letters, so we're just finishing that training this year. Heard math earlier. We were intently listening to potential futures there. We have a tremendous amount of partners from TIP, Spark, all of these pieces, but we look specifically at engagement and how we get to know our students so that we know where they're going. Our real model is in our schools is about coaching and us being in the building. So every person that's inside of what we call Wallace, which is our district office, is expected to spend 60 to 75% of their time, if they are in an instructional, out in buildings, providing in the moment feedback, helping us move forward, assessing engagement, standard alignment. We just spent the last 60 days with an all hands on deck approach in the schools to assess, are we standard aligned? And then moving next to, are we engaging? And finally, we'll spend time on authentic feedback. From a financial standpoint, and I think I mentioned this last time, but the two areas that we use our financial flexibilities in the most, and I brought the person that it is their lane today, but what I would say where we spend the most in the flexibility pieces in personnel and in professional development. Professional development to assist with building these models and making sure that we've deeply invested, studied, learned from experts. And then the other place is our personnel. So hiring industry experts that do not necessarily have a teaching credential to come into our schools and share their level of expertise is where we have essentially reevaluated and placed our money so that we're putting people in front of them that actually engage students. So there's not a simple curriculum program answer to that. I don't believe that there is an actual simple curriculum program to lift and put into, but really where we're putting our money is investing in coaching and development of the people that we have in our district. You heard last time we talked about our lab school and how we're building TA to teacher pipelines, but just really concentrating on what does effective instruction look like and how do we coach people to get better at that. Especially in the state right now, we have a lot of beginning teachers, not just in Roy and Salisbury, but making sure that they can hit the ground running and be impactful sooner than they ever have been, because that takes a bit to get them off the ground as well.
To add to that, one of the things that Ms. Kamnitz and I heard was the flexibility, and that they don't have to have a ton of folks putting things in boxes to get the funding. They're the ones putting the funding in the boxes where it's needed. Is that a good way to put it?
Yes.
Kelly?
There's an accountability process in that, and they shared that they have to defend their ideas and how it's linked to student outcome improvement. And they're very well versed in that at this point, especially if they've been with us for a bit. But really making sure that they are able to, but it's really a thought partner process and a coaching process of how do we improve student performance.
Thank you, Dr. Withers.
Mhm.
Any other questions or comments? If not, thank you so much.
Sure.
Appreciate you coming back.
Thank you.
Today, the last item is an action item, policy reform. This is something we covered last month. So, Ryan, you're gonna go back through it again, or we're gonna just allow people to look at this and move on?
I know this is, I'm the last thing between you all and lunch, so it's a dangerous place to be, but fortunately, there haven't been any changes to this since what you all saw last month on discussion. So unless there's any further questions, I don't have anything to add. It's just on for approval tomorrow.
Thank you once again. We appreciate your work, Ms. Garber's work, and Allison's work on this. Thank you. Mr. Chair, that completes our report.
Thank you, Mr. Blackburn. We'll now pause for lunch and reconvene at 1:30. 1:30.